be here. As I'm standing here, I feel like I'm in line at Space Mountain at Disneyland for the first time in my life, right? I've got those butterflies in my stomach. I'm really anxious. I'm not sure whether I'm coming or going. And that's just what happens every time before I speak. Now, I know my content very, very well, so this shouldn't make anybody nervous, but ego gets involved and it makes me want, what are you guys going to really think of me? There's 130 people on here. This is just overwhelming. So I really, really want to thank Devin for asking me to share. Tiffany, thank you for leading this meeting magnificently. I've been on a lot of Zoom meetings and it can be a mess unless you have a really, really amazing leader. So great job. And thanks to everybody else that makes this meeting happen. My sobriety date is June 28th of 1993. I do have a home group, which is 7850 Knuckleheads. It's a men's stag meeting that meets in Phoenix, Arizona, traditionally meets in Phoenix, Arizona, other than COVID-19. I do have a sponsor, and that's Mark S. And I have sponsees. I work with guys and go arm in arm with them through the journey of Alcoholics Anonymous and step work. And I'm grateful for the life that I have, and always look forward to opportunities to give back. Man, how amazing was Flow last week? I was blown away. I was really, really impressed. There was a few things that sort of jumped out, and he talked about that alcohol worked until it didn't. And I really, really related to that. Weed turned his head up louder. I definitely got that, and that he didn't want the party to end. I'll talk a little bit about that and about that delusion that there actually was a party going on towards the end, and that I'm the pipe and not the well. And I know that he quoted Bob B on that, and I'm quoting Flow on that. So really, really amazing. I want to welcome you if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I hope you hear something that makes you want to keep coming back. Barb B and company, you guys do win the prize for absolutely the best video on this Zoom. So hands down, congratulations. That's awesome. And I'm going to share a little bit about my experience, strength, and hope, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today, and what I'm like today. And the man that stands in front of you is not the boy that walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm really grateful for that fact. I'm grateful for the fact that change has occurred, that immense amounts of change have occurred, and the change is not done. If I could wear one shirt for the rest of my life, and it would either say under construction or work in progress, and or my favorite Nike slogan, which is there is no finish line. And I have to just stay really vigilant with Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll get into some of the specifics of that. And so I want to read here just one little piece here. I should have grabbed this, but fortunately it's going to pull right up. So it is just this, and it says, the great fact is just this. This is page 25 out of the big book for those following along at home. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. And just sort of starting there is that is sort of the essence of what my life and sort of the progress looks like, right? So if you were ever to read the back of the book of this talk, that's what's on it, is that great fact. And that sort of is the sort of the synopsis of the synopsis of what's happened. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and it was an awesome place to grow up. And I did a lot of fun things there. I grew up with a really, what I would consider a pretty normal life. At least normal from the outside looking in. I had a dad that worked a lot, was just an absolute stand-up guy, still is. And I had a mom that was an active alcoholic, and she drank boxed wine. And we didn't know how many boxes she went through because that box always seemed to stay right there in the exact same spot. But what I knew is that my mom had her, she had her trials and tribulations with alcoholism, and ultimately got sober when I was 15. But when I was a kid, I just remember my mom being really happy a lot. She was way happier than my dad was. And I attributed that to the reality that she drank and he didn't. He didn't for health reasons. And when I mean health reasons, it wasn't because he had a bad liver or his kidneys were blown out. He just wanted to get in better shape. So you guys know what he is. He is a normal drinker. And because there was no way at the end that I would have quit for those types of reasons. But I remember my first escape, and I'm going to jump right in because this is important. And it wasn't alcohol. And fortunately for those listening at home, it wasn't drugs either. It was called a game of chokeout. And if you've never played chokeout, I wouldn't recommend it, but this is what it was. Your friend would hold you by the throat until you turned a different color, then they would let you go and you'd end up on the ground. And I liked time travel. It felt really magical. And then you feel the pins and needles in just about every extreme of your body, right? Toes and fingers. And man, I like that. So we did it a lot. And I can remember waking up the next day feeling quite stupid. Not only for how we spent our evening, but the fact that I had killed that many brain cells the night before. I don't believe I've built any of those back, so I probably would have been Albert Einstein otherwise. But anyway, I never look back with any regret on my life. But I had two fine examples in my life, which were my sisters, and I'm going to keep, I want to keep their names out of it, out of respect for the tradition. So we're just going to call one the angel, and we'll call the other one the devil. And those were essentially who my sisters were growing up in my life. I had an older sister, my oldest sister, who was 3 years older than me, and the middle sister, who was 2 years older than me, gave me two dichotomies of sort of how to approach life. And certainly one looked funner than the other. And so I would see that my middle sister, who was just a darling student and rarely did things unless she had bad influences. She rarely did bad things. And she was a very honest and still is a stand-up human being today. And I'm proud of what she's become. But growing up, I would see her work diligently to come home with an amazing report card. And all of that would be quickly overshadowed by the fact that my 14 or 15-year-old sister at the time had taken dad's car out the night before and got busted for it, right? Or had, thrown a party while my mom was at a business meeting during the day, during school. I saw these two examples. I saw one really, it looked like she was having a lot of fun, and one that it didn't look like hard work paid off. And so I just sort of parked this away as I sort of was going through life. But life felt lame. It felt boring. It felt slow. And so I infused a lot of adrenaline into my life pretty early on, both before the drink and after I took my first drink. And so it was steep hills and steering my skis off of cliffs and driving fast cars in places that you should be driving slow. And I love the adrenaline. It actually made life feel like it was worth living. Started having some consequences with it, with broken bones and injuries, and add alcohol into the equation, it got pretty messy. And I remember my first drink. My first drink was that Chablis box wine that was in the fridge. Took it right out of the turkey neck. No sense in dirty in a glass. And I didn't realize how gross it was until I actually drank it and swallowed it. And I thought, well, apparently you got to chug this stuff for it to work. So I continued to do that, and then I chased it with a Virginia Slims menthol cigarette. And that was my bold start into my career of alcoholism. And there was nothing abnormal about that first drink, other than the fact that I was 10. That would be the only abnormal piece to it. And what's ironic is that I have a 9 and an 11-year-old now, and I just can't imagine either of my kids picking up a drink and doing some of the behaviors that I took part in. But fortunately, their mom, who's on this Zoom and a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, her and I don't keep any alcohol in the house, and they're going to have to get pretty darn creative if they want to get away with it. So I like the effect produced by alcohol. I also like the effect produced by cars, helicopters, and foot chases. Because when you're drinking underage, you have a tendency to get chased by the general public or the authorities. And I remember the first time I got chased by the police. They were in a helicopter and I was on foot. And I just remember their spotlight. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm 11, and I'm hanging out with my oldest sister, who was hanging out with people a couple years older than them. I was way out of my element, but the only goal was to make sure that I wasn't the slowest guy out there. But my other sister was, and so we just did our part to get away. And I remember my heart beating out of my chest and through my throat, and I just couldn't wait to do it again. I loved getting away with stuff. It was just, it was awesome. Criminal behavior became quick a part of my life. And it does, because I didn't have the skills and I also had an appetite for substances in my life that cost money that I couldn't seem to get elsewhere. And, you know, I started pushing away a lot of adults. And I remember a really interesting event that happened when I was in 5th grade. And it was the first day that I had ever been suspended from school. And I remember walking down the hallway, and my buddy Brian R. Gave me a high five as I was walking through the hallway. And that was the last I'd ever seen Brian, and never saw him again because he died that night. And I just remember the impact that that had on my life at that time, that life suddenly became fragile, and that life was to be lived and not to be squandered. And I felt like school was squandering it. And I felt like, you know, holidays and birthdays and Tuesdays were squandering away this life. And so internally, I just, I created a mantra inside of me, which was live life to the fullest. And it didn't matter the time or the day. Let's party. I'm always going to put party in quotations, because I seem to put parties like everywhere, but they weren't really parties. But I had to tell myself that, so that I at least felt comfortable about what I was doing. Suicide started to crop up in my life at around like early high school years. And some of the crowds that I was running with were getting a little shady, and people were taking their own lives. And I can remember specifically, I can remember hearing some horrific situations about a buddy of mine that walked into a party, was lost and confused, and was out of his mind, and took his own life in the middle of the party on the couch. And man, I remember what that felt like to sort of process through it. But what it did was it increased my curiosity of what was on the other side. What was on the other side? And is it better than this life? And that curiosity had a tendency to drive some of my behavior. And I started drinking and dry goods. You know, there were other substances that were certainly easier for me to get than alcohol. I'm not afraid of talking about drugs and Alcoholics Anonymous, because I talk about alcohol enough, and drugs are talked about in the big book, and it's just that's what brought me here. And God saw fit to get me sober at the age of 18. And I am forever grateful for the fact that was my bottom. But the reality was that there were some things that started happening right before I got sober, which was I got braces on, which just seemed to ruin my life. I don't know why I made such a big deal of braces, but I started having a lot of societal distancing, right? What we've been doing for the last 2 months, I practiced that for years, you know, and I know a lot of us did, right? I was an absolute family disgrace. And my dad had a lot of pride that I was his only son, and him and I were once close. And I just kept creating more and more distance. And I crushed his heart on several occasions. And I'm so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous that have given me a full opportunity to repair that damage that was done. You know, I was doing a lot of this crazy behavior, lying a ton. I was a pathological liar. And when I would get caught, I wouldn't think, God, I really need to stop lying. This just isn't, I just said, I got to stop getting caught. I just need to become a better liar. This is really, I obviously am falling short of my peer group here. And so I just kind of doubled down. And what I heard something as I sort of walked into Alcoholics Anonymous shortly thereafter, and it says that my chance for a better, my chance for a better past was gone. And that when I walked in, it was what I had. And I just remember, I'm going to sort of fast forward here so that I can talk about some of the really good stuff, is that my bottom was involved a lot of felonies. It involved grand theft from a federally insured bank. And that wasn't how I was raised. And that also was, that freaked me out genuinely as an 18-year-old. I haven't grown vertically since I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. So since I was 18, I've always been right around 5'6", 5'7" with a nice pair of shoes. And so prison wasn't really looking all that attractive for a guy like me. And my dad knew that and did everything he could to keep me out of it and keep me out of there, and spent a lot of money to keep me out of there. And he was successful in doing it. But I had a 3-year tail. And that 3-year tail was, if I got caught walking, there was going to be hell to pay, and I needed to have a clean record rolling in, and so that helped, actually. That helped. But what I found out was that treatment wasn't going to keep me sober, because I got sent to treatment. Actually, I got sent to outpatient, which I felt outpatient was pretty, that worked out good. Sobriety on the part-time program seemed to fit my, what I was going after at that time. So it was outpatient without Alcoholics Anonymous. And all I did was try to lie my way through. And that eventually led me to a position where I was homeless in May and June of 1993. And I know the fun was over. And that the insanity and the delusion that things are going to be different stopped being true in my head. And my head, my head was screaming, and this guilt, remorse, and shame was bubbling up, and it was sort of up to my neck at that point. And I had this on a moral, philosophical, spiritual, financial basis. It just, everything was, I was rotting from the inside out, and I hoped for the end. And the book talks a lot about that. And and I almost made that supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight, as the book talks about. And I'm glad I didn't. I'm really glad I didn't. Obviously, I'm not sure if I would have been successful or not, but I may not be standing here in front of you if I was. And ultimately, my bottom happened before I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous by a couple of months. But what ended up happening was that sort of sick and tired of being sick and tired ended up starting to be pervasive in every single day of my life. And I had my first surrender. And I remember walking down the street of my neighborhood, and I grew up in a beautiful neighborhood with beautiful neighbors and great families and a lot of love. And I was full of shame and guilt and remorse, and I had fallen. And I remember walking the stairs of my parents' house. I sat on the step. In the air, the sound of the birds, and I remember hearing my dad open the door. And the way he unlocked, the door was locked, and the high key was gone. And I sat on the porch, and underneath the porch were my belongings. Clothes, anything that to me was underneath, and that's actually where we kept the wood for the fireplace, the wood and my clothes. I showed up there every day to go have fun, right, to go party, and not that day, not that day, and that was my first surrender. And as I sat there, and my dad said, "You need some help." And I agreed that I needed some help, and $20 would have given me a lot of help at that point. And he said, "I'm not going to give you a dime." He said, "But I'll give you a cent." He said, "But you got to guess what's going on in your life, because what it is normal with my 3 years prior." And I come up with, I'll think about it. I had a lot going on at that time in my life, and you know, I couldn't really make some rash decision to go off to this place called treatment, right? I was homeless. I didn't have a job. I was running out of, I didn't have any more money, but I had to think about it. That was the best I could come up with. And the next day I came back, and I was done. But my ego was screaming, and what it was screaming is, what will they say? And quitters never win. I don't know where that came from. Apparently some, you know, you know, after school show said never win. So I just thought that applied to everything, including drinking. And so that idea of what would they say and what are they going to think was strong in my life at that point. Now, if you knew the scumbags that I hung out at that point in my life, you wouldn't really care what they thought or what they said, but they meant a lot to me at that time. And because they were real friends. Actually, no, they weren't. They if I would have turned my head, they would have taken my wallet. And the same, we had the same rules between ourselves. So it was just all BS that was happening inside my head. And so off I go, and I will speak to treatment that's part of my story, but it doesn't need to be a part of anybody's story. And here's what I love about the treatment that I went to. I went to Newberg, Oregon, and I went to a treatment center that took me to meetings every single day, that required step work. They required me to read the big book. They gave me the Grapevine and the 12 and 12, and they required me to do some writing. They walked me through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I was so amazed with when I was in treatment and when I walked into my first AA meeting is that it was extraordinary to me that these adults that I was surrounded by in that meeting were challenged by the same thing that I was, right? And I'm in a treatment center. I was just too old for an adolescent facility, and I was 20 years younger than the next guy in my treatment center. Professional folks that had professional licenses on the line. And I was so away that they, through all their education and momentum in life, that they were still challenged by the exact same thing that I was. That was really powerful to me at the time. And I had an epiphany that when I was in this, that there's a possibility that my strength in this world is my weakness. And that's something that I've taken with me since then. And I remember the day that I cracked the door on spirituality. When I walked in, there was a questionnaire, and on that questionnaire it says, "Do you believe in a power greater than yourself?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Describe your higher power." And I wrote, "Me." And I knew nothing about the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. My parents had sent me to a Jesuit high school for 1 year. That's all I could handle there. And I hung out with the Jewish kid, and I just didn't want. I felt like religion was for people that were weak, and they certainly weren't the people that I wanted to hang out with. And so I encapsulated the word God in with all of that. And I thought, I'm very powerful. Humans are the most powerful beings on the planet. Right? And I remember being challenged by that, by a counselor. And he said, "Man, I'm just going to ask you 2 questions. And if you can make either one of these things happen, I will totally back down from these questions around spirituality." I said, "Okay." He said, I'm just going to ask you to head down to the coast. You know, we were about 90 miles away from the Oregon coast. He said, "Just head down to the coast and just stop the waves." I'm like, "Come on, man, you can't do that." I said, "Okay, fair enough." He said, "Go ahead and stand up." So I stood up, and he said, "Jump." And so I jumped, and he said, "I can't." And when my feet hit the floor, he said, "I didn't tell you to come back down." And I thought, that's different. Okay. So let's talk, right? What are you talking about here? He said, "You got this God idea all wrong." And he said, "I'm not trying to impress on you something that may have been impressed on you something in the past." He said, "It can be anything you want. It just can't be you." He said, "It can be gravity. It can be Mother Nature. It can be the wind. It can be the waves," right? I said, "Okay." I said, what, great. If it's the waves, what do I do? He said, just get on your knees and ask God. Let's call it God, just for simplicity purposes. Call it whatever you want, but call it God if you want. And ask God to keep you sober in the morning. And at the end of the day, say thank you. And I said, all right, fair enough. And I'm probably, I don't know, a dozen days sober or so at this time. And I remember going back to my room, and I committed to doing this. And why I committed to doing this was the night before we had an H&I meeting, and some guys came in, and it was a candlelight meeting. And I remember vividly the feeling in that room. And there was about 25 of us that were in treatment, and 2 people brought the meeting in, and they looked around the room and they said, we're not here to discourage anybody, but unfortunately less than half of you will likely stay sober after leaving this facility. And I looked around and I was like, there's no way that Paul could drink, right? Paul's got a couple of kids. He was an emergency room doc, and his license was on the line. There's no way that he could drink again. And then I've got Barbara to my right, and there's no way Barbara could drink again, right? Like, she had purple toes, and she was towards the end of her life. I thought she was 80. I found out later she was 50. And Barbara, there's no way Barbara could drink again. She's had so much physical impact. There's no way. And a voice came inside my head and said, what about you? And I thought, well, that's a weird voice. And the next voice that said, you're going to be one of the guys that makes it. And I was not a overly ambitious individual at that stage of my life. I didn't have a high confidence level in the thoughts that were, traveling around between my ears. But that thought and that belief that if I was going to be one of the guys that makes it meant one major thing, is that I was going to do what they were going to tell me to do. And when they told me to get on my knees that next day and pray, which I had never done in my life prior to that. So I went into my room, and it's an old school place that I can remember having keyholes, and there was a gap underneath the door, and I closed the door, and my roommate was down reading the paper, and I peer down and look underneath the door to make sure nobody could see under there, and make sure that nobody could see through the keyhole, because God forbid you see me on my knees asking for help. God forbid. Now, people found me naked in their front yard, drunk as a skunk, and that didn't seem to bother me. But suddenly I'm on my knees thinking somebody that's in treatment, some other colossal failure at life, is going to see me praying on my knees trying to get help, and I'm worried about that. That's ego. That's fear. It was all right there. And oh my gosh, it was it was crazy. On page 64, it says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And I always maybe in my mind, I had this delusion that if I could just straighten out mentally and physically, maybe the spiritual stuff would get taken care of. And that's not the way that it works. And then it says on page 28, what seemed a flimsy reed has proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. A new life has been given us, or if you prefer, a design for living that really works. And I started hearing these stories in Alcoholics Anonymous about people that had been transformed into these lives that were unimaginable as comparison to the life that they had before. And I remember the guy, his name was Ralph. And a lot of people called him Dirty Ralph. I don't know why, but his name was Ralph. And he'd always say, good evening, boys and girls. My name is Ralph, and I'm an alcoholic. And everybody would yell, hey, Ralph. And Ralph shared his story at the first Friday night we're doing a group meeting in Tualatin, Oregon. And I remember Ralph's story. I remember his humor. I remember his relatability. I remember his bankruptcy. And then the fact that he got to, 1 year later, his life was worth living. And the triumphs that happened as a result of working the steps and getting down to causes and conditions. And finally, in his life, having a life that's worth living. Now, Ralph didn't look like me, and Ralph didn't have a story like me. Ralph and I grew up very differently. Ralph was an insurance agent, and Ralph had been divorced, and Ralph had a couple of kids. And but what he talked about, those feelings on the inside, that emotion that he brought about, that he talked about so eloquently, I connected to. And I don't know about the crowds that you all hung out with, but my crowd didn't get very vulnerable. We didn't talk about things like emotions and feelings and fears, but that was talked about in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thought, man, this is just amazing. I don't know how these people are reading my mind, but it's really pretty spectacular, because I was so impressed that they were coming up with the same things that I was feeling and thinking. And the one thing that I was really afraid of at age 18 is that my life was pretty much over. That this thing was pretty much done. It was, you know, I probably wasn't ever going to have a real girlfriend ever again. I wasn't going to be cool. I wasn't going to have a life that was worth living. I was just going to be a has-been. And I was probably going to be like this dude that I knew, that I remember when I used to go to Keggers. He got religion in high school, and we'd be at Keggers, and he'd show up with a 4-foot sign that just said, "You are sinning. Come find Jesus." And he would literally stand out with a megaphone at our Keggers and yell. And I'm like, I can't end up like that dude. That was just what I committed to that. And that's what I was afraid of, right? Part of me also was afraid I'd get into Alcoholics Anonymous and I'd find out it was some creative side door into the church. And then next thing I know, I'm wearing all white, selling books door to door. And I was like, man, there's just not much street cred in that. I need life a little bit more, exciting than that, right? Or I'd be at an airport, right? Trying to convince people that they're drunks, and I just didn't want that. And the other thing that I didn't want, and I was afraid of this, I was afraid to get my old life back. And when I mean my old life, my pre-drinking life, I was afraid of getting that back, because that life led me to drink. that life was restless, irritable, and discontented, right? And I was uncomfortable in that world. I was afraid that that's what you guys were talking about, that I would get back. And if you're new, I want to assure you that if you follow the steps and follow the principles, you are going to get a brand new life. A life you've never known, and a life likely beyond your wildest imagination and dreams. And that's how it's worked out for me. Now, I had to adjust my imaginations and dreams a little bit. And it doesn't look like a 1980s rap video, because that's what I actually thought. If life was being lived, that's what it was going to look like. Like Sir Mix-a-Lot or something. But I didn't get that life back. Now, let me be super clear. If you put the plug in the jug, let me be personal about it. If I just put the plug in the jug, that's exactly what I'm going to end up with. I'm going to end up with my pre-drinking life, my pre-drinking fears and insecurities, and I'm going to drink again. This isn't about not drinking. It's about not drinking, but it's not only about not drinking. It's not about just going to meetings, right? Meetings are places that we can go to be able to talk about the application of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in our life, and the effect that that's having, and the fact that we can be an opportunity or be a channel of God, to be able to share with people the testament of what has happened when we turn our will and our life over to the care of God, and the amazing things that have happened as a result of that. And Alcoholics Anonymous, meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous do that. But without step work, without self-sacrifice, without getting on the firing lines, I don't have a lot to add to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I'll talk a little bit more about sort of what that looks like. Man, I sort of entered AA immersion, and AA immersion was when I left treatment after 68 days, and I had done some step work. I was lying less. There was no more criminal behavior that was existing in my life. That was a first for me. And there was less selfishness that was pervasive inside of me. And so I dove into some service, because I was told that's the next thing I need to do. And I was to get birthday cards for those that celebrated anniversaries. And I continued to get involved in the steps. Now, when I was in treatment, they had me do step 4. And step 4 was a pretty scary. I don't know about you, but that first meeting that I went to, I went ahead and I went and read all the steps and figured out which ones I wasn't going to do. And I was actually totally okay with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous until I got to step 2. And then at that point, we suddenly had a problem. And at step 4, it was like, I definitely have an issue with this. My biggest issue was the fact that I wasn't sure if the person that I would share it with was a mandated reporter in the state of Oregon or not. I had done some things that hadn't been shared with another human, nor I ever felt should be. And so I was afraid if that was going to happen, that I'd immediately go to jail and not be able to pass go and collect $200. So I was afraid of that. So my second 4th step, which was after I got out, I covered a couple of these items that I had conveniently left off. And the big book is very eloquent in how it talks about the fact that we have to be thorough. And if we don't, we're likely to drink. And so I remember what it was like. Warren B was my sponsor at the time. And I remember going to a park, going to this park and going in there, and I shared with him some deep, dark secrets that I swore I was going to take to my grave. And they didn't need to be shared with anybody else. They were selfish, dumb acts, and they were big deals to me. And when I shared them, he shared some things with me as well that opened my eyes to the fact that I wasn't alone. And I really appreciated that. And then I walked out of that park feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my life based on recollection. It felt as though I had that 50 pounds of rocks had been taken out of the backpack that I was wearing around in life. And I just felt free. And some of the promises started to come true in my life. And I could look the world in the eye. And I could be alone at perfect peace and ease. And my fears started to fall from me. And that was really, really magical. And it was, and then it talks about, man, our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And so I had to start giving this thing away, and I started giving it away early on in my sobriety. And I just started giving out my phone number. And I did some really, really cool things. I remember when I was a high school dropout, and I mentioned I was homeless. And so I was a really proud member of my family's Christmas card every year. And I remember when I graduated from high school after I got sober, and my dad got so excited, and he was like, so where do you think you're going to go to college? And I said, Dad, I'm not going to waste any more of your money. And crushed, he said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm moving to Maui. And he said, oh no, he just, it was a little troublesome. At 6 months sober, my parents moved to Tokyo, Japan, and left me with their house. And it was shortly after that I moved to Maui, and I stayed sober. And I went to meetings every single day at the Lahaina Alano Club. And I did what I told myself I would do as I sat in my room alone, drinking and using drugs for years on end. I said, man, I'm going to go do that stuff someday, right? And there was always someday, right? And oh man, that Jane's Addiction song, Gonna Kick Tomorrow, right? It's just like everything's tomorrow. Everything is, oh man, when this stuff gets together, it'll be then, right? And when I got sober, I had that opportunity to have it as now. And I did that. And I was homeless in Hawaii. I lived in a Volkswagen van, and I worked at Foot Locker and sold people flip-flops. And I went to the beach 4 days a week, and I lived the life that I was dreaming of. And it was amazing. It was short-lived in the respect that I got bored of being homeless and getting jumped and harassed for being a homeless sober kid. And but it was just so amazing. There was a Bob B, who was quoted last week. I'm going to quote him tonight as well, right? He mentioned in a recent talk that I listened to that life is lived forward, but understood backward. We don't see it when we're in it. And I thought, man, oh man, that is just so, that is so true, right? And, you know, right now we are in this amazing event, and I had a walk with my wife a little bit ago around our neighborhood, and I said, honey, it's pretty amazing that we may not have even seen the bulk of the history that's being written. Like the pen is still active across the paper in the history books for future generations to read about. And Alcoholics Anonymous has proven to adapt greater and faster than any other organization that I have seen out there. There are other organizations that were tied in to platforms such as this that resisted the move versus Alcoholics Anonymous that had very little experience with it and dove right in. And the reason being is that our life depends upon it. And I love that about Alcoholics Anonymous in that respect. I struggled for that first 10 years of my sobriety with love and relationships. I struggled with working. I struggled with you know, I did end up going back to school. I did end up traveling a fair amount. But I had challenges in areas that I didn't have areas. And I had these new things that I could apply the steps to. And I'm grateful for that. And I still do. My life, you know, you look at my life right now, Carrie Ann and I have been married now. We're coming up on 13 years of marriage, and we've got two little kids that are 9 and 11, as I mentioned, and we have the coolest little life. And but we have challenges, and I'm not saying they're problems. Cancer is a problem, right? And death is a problem, and there are things we have little challenges, and I'm grateful for those little challenges today because they're helping me grow. You know, sponsees gave me a sense of purpose during those 10 years, and I remember the day that I surrendered to God as far as relationships were concerned in my life, and I just said, God, if there is somebody that you want me to be with, you pick. Because my picker is broken. And just in case my internet broke up, my picker is broken. And I was emotionally unavailable, looking for other emotionally unavailables. And it was ugly. And I wanted to own that. And God said, go for it. And so once I turned it over, though, it wasn't long after that I met my now wife. And it was divinely inspired. There's no doubt about it. Gosh, you know, another thing that I heard recently was my first year of sobriety. I heard an answer to every problem that I had. And in my second year, I wasn't sure if you were right. And ego returned. And ego has returned many times in my life where I think I've got this thing figured out, and I'm going to hold on to this, right? Whether it's financial, professional, like I said, relationships, whatever the case may be, right? I've had times that I've rested on my laurels, and I suffered dearly as a result. And I have tried to stay extraordinarily vigilant in Alcoholics Anonymous with always having a service position, always having sponsees. Now, I give out my phone number to a lot of guys, and I have no business giving my phone number out because I don't take care of the guys. My sponsees could attest. I just don't answer the phone enough because I'm on the phone with so many other guys. It's just, but God just keeps having me do it and tells me to do it. And I said, okay. I remember there was a period of time that I stopped giving out my number for a little while. And within a couple months, it was like a ghost town in my life, right? Because people just, they moved on and did other things, and people drink, people die, people get jobs, people get girlfriends, people start gambling, things happen. And so I have to constantly give out my number and stay really vigilant, right? And on 61, right? This is, if I'm ever looking for an issue in my life, this is almost always it. Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? That is bad wiring for me. And I have talked to enough people in Alcoholics Anonymous to know that is not unique to me. That in my mind, if I can just manage this life well, I will wrestle satisfaction and happiness out of it. And unfortunately, I'm headed for trouble every time that I do. And this idea of let go and let God is not intuitive. And I wish I could say that at 26 years sober, it would be. But it is definitely more so today than it was then. And there's definitely been progress. And I'm grateful for the progress that has happened. And there have been astronomical changes to who I am, but I am not done growing. I am not done looking and shining the flashlights in the dark crannies of my life to reveal, to uncover, discover, and discard, as it's talked about. And I've got to do this. And my other big challenge is staying where my feet are. I don't know why I have some crazy, unbelievable level of discomfort about staying in the present, but I do. And it's generally where most of my problems occur. It's generally where I lose perspective, right? And so in addition to alcoholism, I also suffer from CLPD, which is chronic loss of perspective disorder. And it's disastrous in my life, because anything good that's going on in my life, I lose perspective on it really, really fast. A gratitude list helps to get me re-engaged in what's really going on. And I get down and I get really tactile. I get 10 fingers, 10 toes, my sense of smell, my sense of hearing, my sense of eyesight, my sense of taste. The fact that I don't have significant pain in my body today, I'm absolutely grateful for. And I have done things in my life that have sacrificed or potentially sacrificed all of these senses that I just said that I was grateful for. Because the reality is, if I wait until I lose one of those to say that I'm grateful for them, I will kick myself to know that I took it for granted for as long as I did. So today I just try and recognize God's gifts and God's grace in my life of these things that are just absolutely beautiful. Character defects. I don't have many new character defects. I don't know if I've had a new character defect in several decades. They just have different symptoms today. They look a little bit different. They're dressed a little bit differently. Today it is my responsibility to identify the character defects that are going on in my life and to ask and pray to God to remove them. I don't change. I can't change. I don't change me. I have wiring that says that I can and that I do. I can't change a character defect, but I can ask God. That's the action that I can take. And today I've realized in the last couple of years that I am no longer in the outcomes business. I am only in the actions business. And it's what actions am I taking today? And I many times will do it with no intent or expectation around what the outcome even is what I want. I'm just simply going to try and put one foot in front of the other and do it right. It's that same idea that was talked about with Flo when he said that he was the pipe and not the well. And man, I connect to that so much. I also believe that my spiritual life today, my spiritual journey is subtraction versus addition. There is nothing that I need day in and day out to be spiritually connected, but there are things that need to be removed from me. And that's such an important aspect, because there were so many days that I sat around waiting to be full and ready to connect with God. But the reality is I can be full and connected with God every single day, so long as I can subtract ego and I can just apply some willingness and open-mindedness to God's will and life for me. And I'm going to start wrapping it up here. So bottom of page 14, it's my favorite line in the big book. And it says, for if an alcoholic fails to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. And here's what I know is that I have some certain trials and low spots ahead. And nobody will ever have any pity on me, because that is life on life's terms. It's just what happens. If I stay alive long enough, other people will die, and I'll be saddened by their death. I could have somebody that it would be completely unexpected in my life pass away, and I could be absolutely crushed. And what I hope is that I'm ready, and that I'm spiritually ready for that day. And what that is through work and self-sacrifice for others. That's putting in the work. I have an H&I commitment. I'm committed at my home group. I'm committed to my sponsees, a couple of book studies a week, and I stay engaged in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm on the phone with at least a handful of alcoholics every single day. And I just try and stay connected and find out where I can be of service. And I've tried to put my entire life on a service plane. Work, home, I'm terrible at it. My personal life, home is the hardest place for me. And I'm so grateful for a wife that challenges me and pushes me and keeps me accountable to that. And I love her for it. I love you, Carrie Ann. So my last piece is I mentioned that I had braces when I was in high school. And when I got done with having 3 years of braces, and if you've ever had braces, you know, every month you go in and they add new bands and they basically wrench everything down, right? And what they're doing is they're moving the teeth, right? And so every month you just have this pain, right? This, you know, it just wrenches it down. And at the end of it, they fit these thing called retainers onto your teeth. And those retainers keep your teeth in place. And they told me that if I put those retainers in every single day, that my teeth won't shift. And I waited a week after that, and my teeth had shifted. I didn't know that. And the same thing happens to me in Alcoholics Anonymous. The longer I'm away from step work and meetings, the more I shift away from my spiritual center. And that you guys are my retainers, and you pull me back into the center, and you pull me back into a spiritual connection. And collectively, we stay whole together. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you so much, Devin. Thank you so much, Tiffany. And God bless everybody.